Hello, everybody. This is going to be episode 21 of Dreadful Talk. Really excited about that little milestone. I've been here 21 weeks in a row. I don't take that lightly. I pride myself on, consistency and knocking out these episodes every week for you. And this week I have a special one. It's a guest, not necessarily typical of the program, but something I would like to get more of, in the future, and that's a real live intellectual researcher. This week's guest is going to be Jenine Hillaire, and she's an Apparel Studies and Sociological Researcher. So it's not just my stone buddies talking bro science on here this week. And she's joining in. Let's get her on here. And while we're waiting for Janine to get on here, hello, Janine.
Hey.
I really appreciate it. Before we dive in, I'm just going to read off this quick little sponsorship real quick, and then we can get to the meat and potatoes. This episode is being brought to you by my sponsor, Zach Brown. Zach Brown can help you in real estate, life insurance, and property insurance. Man of many talents. He's going to make you feel comfortable. You're going to feel like you've known him a long time. Good buddy of mine, good people to work with. Not your typical stuffy businessman. He's a man of the people. You can reach him at 405-255-7867. Name is Zach Brown. It's real estate, life insurance, and property insurance. And you can reach out at 405-255-7867. Thank you for being patient with that, Janine. Welcome to Dreadful Talk. I was introducing you a little bit, but I'll get back into it. You are an Apparel Studies and Sociological Researcher, and I just want to say that'll be a breath of fresh air for the listeners who are used to listening to my stone buddies talk bro science. So I appreciate you coming on and lending us a little bit of your time. And, I'll let you introduce yourself and just say hi to everybody.
All right. Well, hi all. I'm a lot of things actually. Like that, the intro I gave you was just kind of only part of what I do. Right now, my focus is on Indigenous identity and the way that that's articulated in a settler colonial context, which is what we live in.
Yes.
So, so there's a lot of there's a lot that goes on, I think, in the world around clothing that we don't often recognize, and the way that we express our identities, because that's essentially what clothing is.
Yeah, totally.
So one of the things that I want to do, one of my main missions in life, is to do something called decolonize fashion. Okay. And that's kind of dispel a lot of myths and a lot of actually sexist views around fashion, because a lot of people think that it's just fluff. And I'm like, but you wear clothing every day. So
yeah, for sure. There's
kind of what I do.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, there's a lot to dissect there. I think and this isn't even a question I wrote down. This is just something that I thought of based off what you just said. Do you think a lot of I always like to try to trace things back to the root of the problem, and I feel like a lot of times our society, when we try to address a problem, we're dealing with the flowers and the leaves as opposed to the root, and so I think, do you think it's fair to say that a root of a lot of this, problems with the fashion industry and all that, it comes from it being rooted in Italy, in Western Europe? Do you think that has any, a lot of the Italian designers, the Gucci's, the high-end fashion, it's a lot of Italy, a lot of France, I believe. Do you think that's kind of where the problem starts, or is that a byproduct, or kind of dive into that?
All right. Well, there's actually a lot to dissect with that question. So yes, what we think of fashion right now is very rooted in these Eurocentric views of that it's an industry, that it's this kind of high end, like high class, like it's a classist thing. Actually,
Yeah,
a lot of
yeah,
people see fashion as a very classist thing where you have to be of a certain class to actually like follow that. And what's really messed up and antiquated about that is, we're not in the times of sumptuary laws where the royalty restricts what people can wear.
yeah.
Like we're so far past that. But for some reason, these like histories are kind of stuck in our minds as like, ooh, fashion. What we consider to be fashion is all stuck, is all kind of stuck in that kind of class system. When in actuality, we all take part in fashion every day, every moment of our lives because it's how we fashion ourselves.
Hmm.
And a lot of what I look at is where our identities are expressed. Our identities are expressed through clothing, and in fact, that's how we choose what we wear every day is based off of our identity. And it's almost like, and everybody knows it. Like everybody feels it deep down if they're wearing something that doesn't express who they are. They
It's
know it. They
it's the
know it
worst.
like deep down, and it's like this little tinge of like if you've ever felt insecure wearing something, you know exactly instantaneously that that is not your identity,
Yeah,
and that's how closely it's linked.
yeah.
So this idea that fashion is like solely like there, I get so many people intimidated. They go like, oh, I'm not really a fashion person. It's like you wear clothing, you fashion yourself. That's what I'm interested in.
And
That's really what
even
I'm
the
interested
people that wear, like, let's just say bland or ordinary clothing, they're usually doing so intentionally, which is still expressing themselves, even though they're trying to like not express themselves. It still reflects their, perhaps conservative personality. Like, it's still saying things about them, even though they're like trying to make it not. That's really interesting. And also, I kind of wanted to bring something full circle. Just kind of made me think of it. You're talking about the classism and then the high-end fashion. What I find even more ironic about that is those high-end fashion Italian designers, they get a lot of their inspiration and ideas from like the American streets and like the poor folk, the hood, the poor folks, the people that can't afford their clothes is where they draw a lot of, and then a lot of those people are getting those clothes from thrift stores and recycling vintage looks, and it really is a very interesting cycle of how that all works.
Well, one of the things that I'm fascinated by is this kind of clashing of we have these views that are stuck in this old school way of thinking, like I was saying before, this idea that fashion is this class thing is so antiquated. But then you have, we have this like almost forward consciousness where we're just like, oh yeah, fashion is for everybody now because you have all these fast fashion brands that are taking inspiration from what runway. So it's kind of the opposite of what you're talking about. It's almost like they inform each other. And it's this big mismatch of like the streets inform the streets and actually like and including marginalized cultures
Yeah, true.
like inform high fashion, and then high fashion regurgitates that back out, and then fast fashion comes in and essentially like grabs that as well. So it's almost like the inspiration basically breaks those class boundaries or those class barriers, and we kind of walk around thinking it's like, oh well, I'm wearing something that's just like what was on the runway 2 weeks ago, so there is no class system when we still have those like antiquated like underlining aspects to our culture that we don't even realize are there.
True,
So
true. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Let me ask you this kind of interesting question because, like, I don't know, a little bit about my background. I'm kind of a little bit more of like a hip hop background, like that type of that's how I came up. I not just solely that, but that's kind of the culture I grew up in. And do you think that and it used to be a bigger thing back in like the early 2000s. There were like black clothing brands. Like there was Sean John, Fubu. It's just I mean there's other one, Bathe, but like there's these black clothing brands And I feel like that's kind of gone away a little bit, and it's kind of more homogenized. But like, do you find like back when there was like black brands or insert race brand here, like did you find that to be a good thing? Like, because people were expressing their cultural identities, or do you find that as kind of a bad thing? Because like I saw the flip side of it, where like if you were a black kid that grew up back then that didn't want to dress like that, like say you were wearing like a white brand or whatever, you may catch shit for that or have your blackness questioned for that. So I just like I don't know. I can kind of see both sides of the coin. It's like the whole FUBU buy us for us type of shit, and it kind of has good intentions, but maybe had some bad consequences. Or I don't know. What do you think about all that?
No, I think you make an excellent point, or you bring up an excellent topic. One of the things that I personally struggle with, and that's another way of decolonizing fashion, is this idea that your identity is so controlled by capitalism.
Yes.
So one of the things that I firmly believe in is voting with your dollar. So one of the things that these black run businesses, these black fashion businesses, gave an opportunity for us to keep the dollar within that community.
Yeah.
And that's hugely important, especially when you're talking about marginalized communities. These marginalized communities, they need that, I actually purposefully buy like all of my Black Lives Matter t-shirts. I've got 4 of them, and they're all from black owned businesses and screen printers.
Yeah, yeah. Me and my
And I
wife are
do
real big on that. Like, she loves buying native made earrings, and I love buying. I also like to buy T-shirts from black owned companies. So, yeah, I totally agree with you there. And but continue. I wanted to co-sign that. I do believe that's
Yes.
very important to vote with your dollar and spend. Make your voice matter. With the where you purchase things from. Thank you.
Exactly. Like that's like these earrings are actually by a really awesome. I actually probably need to get you the name of the artist
Yeah,
who does, but it's California indigenous jewelry artist. She does
perfect.
amazing work. And there's and she like there's always history. There's always stories behind every shell and every bead. But so that idea of voting with your dollar is like a lot of part of that. Let's see, what are the words I'm trying to find? um, there's a very important connection there when you were talking about identity. There's like a couple different like split offs. So
Yeah,
I have
yeah.
a tough time with like linear conversations. So I have a
It's
couple different split
okay.
offs.
We can bring it full circle. Just go with the flow.
Okay, so one of the first things I wanted to touch on, because it's so my jam, is like it's all about this identity. Is It's almost like this, like capitalism has this kind of control over how we express our identity, and like voting with your dollar is actually one way to kind of, you're kind of using capitalism
Yeah.
in ways in that sense. But at the same time, it's like we are at this day and age kind of at the mercy of what's produced, if that makes any sense. So for instance, you had all of these, you were talking about how you had, black run brands, but were they producing what every black kid wanted to wear? And when you're talking about a marginalized community that has a difficult time, acquiring loans or wealth, these things are all part of like the capitalist structure and systemic racism that all
Yeah.
kind of,
It all ties
that
in. It
all kind
really
of,
does. That's why I
that
hate
all kind of results
like you'll
in
hear
that limitation of what you can like express.
yeah, for sure. And I hate you'll hear something real common like nowadays, you'll hear and it usually comes from like the right wingers. They're like, why has everything got to be about race nowadays? And it's like we just illustrated how like quite literally race is woven into everything from even the fucking t-shirt you put on. So it's like but I always hear this narrative of like, oh, like they're making everything about race, and it's like, no, no, we're acknowledging that it's things actually like race ties into these other aspects of society. But I don't know. I had to just get that off my chest real quick.
No, identity actually is a huge kind of, it's so vital to our health. It's so vital to our identities are essentially a huge part of what our psyche is, like our emotional and mental stability has a great deal to do with our identities and how we view ourselves, like what our worldviews are, what our values are. Those are all kind of entrenched in who we are. And yet you have somebody say, oh, race is not a thing, and you're erasing an identity
Yeah,
just by saying that. And so and also not having a way to express that identity is also an erasure. Also can be like an erasure of identity. It's these things that have these dynamic relationships. It's like I said, you immediately feel insecure when you're wearing something that doesn't fit you. Well, it's like if you have no options out there. In fact, a lot of creative people, a lot of fashion designers come out of that idea that like they couldn't find anything that was their identity that really spoke to them, so they decided to make it.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that's and that kind of all that again, there's this huge important like interplay between identity, what's available for us to actually express that identity.
True.
And then you have this like wide culture, this mass culture that has that viewpoint that it's like identity doesn't matter, right? Why can't we all just get along if we just erase our identities? But that's one of the reasons
Yeah.
why we can't get along.
Yeah, because yeah, you know what's crazy? I was actually it's gonna seem completely irrelevant, but it's super relevant. I was actually watching last night. My wife loves like children's movies. We were watching Trolls World Tour. And I don't know if you've seen it, but like the concept of the movie is that like all the trolls are like separated by like what kind of music they listen to. So there's like the rock trolls and the pop trolls, and then like one type of music tries to they said they're like essentially we can't get along because we're too different, and then different people interpret it different ways. Like the rock trolls think the only way for everybody to get along is everybody listens to rock, and then other trolls are like, oh, but we can all have our differences. But like it illustrates perfectly what we're talking about. Like it just I don't know, like it's crazy. I happened to just watch that movie last night, and it just I swear it's like this exact conversation, like just more colorful and with a little more auto tune, but like definitely still in the same vein of. But I thought it was cool though that like something as innocent and or whatever fun as a Trolls movie could introduce maybe some of these kind of intricate, delicate concepts and get kids maybe thinking about that. And I don't know, I feel like they did a good job of it. But yeah, kind of want to also transition. Like I said, there's kind of also this dichotomy, right? Like back, like I said, it seemed to be really the late '90s, early 2000s. There was all these black streetwear brands. It was really popular and crossing over into mainstream culture. And but there was also this kind of like downside of it to where, on one hand, millions of black kids everywhere, they could represent their identity. And this is black, and this is, I'm proud of this. And there's a black millionaire behind this. And we're voting with our dollar and all those positive things that we named up. But then at the same time, every school had them couple of black kids who, maybe they hang out with the skateboarders and dress like skateboarders, or they wore rock and roll band t-shirts, or they were like a black emo kid or some shit, and it, as much of all those upsides as those black brands created, like that's not that black kid's identity, and it kind of like it maybe even influences other races to kind of lump all black people like this is how black people dress, and like it can be alienating. Like, wouldn't you say? Like on the flip side of it, everything has good and negative, yin and yang. That there's kind of like a byproduct that comes of that of maybe isolating the individuals that don't align with said culture or whatever.
So one of my favorite, and I don't even like, I don't even know. So this does come from feminism, but some people see feminism as like a negative word. I hope not. I hope your viewers don't. But one of my favorite feminist kind of concepts is intersectionality, and please don't judge intersectionality based off of that feminist label, because intersectionality is basically all about, it's like, I'm this identity and this identity. I
Yeah.
am both. I am and in both. And there's really, and there's really no way to separate it. And in fact,
Yeah.
so like I said, that mismatch, that mishmash that happens in the fashion industry also happens internally within ourselves. We have the things that we see and the things that we value, the things that we love and identify with, and we want to express all of that. It's almost like we're expressing all of that all at once. And like, and I'm sure, and I'm betting that the majority of people out there have like that favorite thing that they want to wear, and it's somehow, like, whether it intentionally or unintentionally, expresses all of these aspects of their identity. And so, like, one of my favorite terms is the indigenerd.
That's a good one.
Indigenous
That needs
nerd.
like a bumper sticker or something.
Yes, it's one of my favorite. One of my favorite. And that's because, like, there are these, like, these stereotypes, right? There are these stereotypes, and those stereotypes have real detrimental consequences with those that have those intersectionalities that don't fit with the stereotype of their identity.
Hmm.
And this is why stereotypes are so messed up and damaging. Regardless of whether or not, it's like, you might do the statistics and be like, well, the majority of Black cultures like this. It's like, well, you can't really say that, because you could be causing that kind of social interaction damage.
Yeah.
And so like we are all these, like, this, like, mix of identity. So when it comes to like that idea of, like, because I run into that. I mean, I'm mixed. I'm part Slacknamish, which is a tribe up in Washington, and so I will get that. Like, I have light colored eyes. I'm not indigenous enough. I'm not Native American enough, and that's and so so then I have to, like, then I kind of go like, well, how do I express that? How do we combine that, or what makes me feel comfortable? And I don't always wear jewelry. I don't always express that Native American identity, but that doesn't mean that I'm not in it. I don't obviously express it, but it doesn't mean that I'm not inadvertently expressing certain
Yeah.
values that align with that. So I think I I I I think that we should all just understand just how complex identity is.
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
love, I would
Yeah.
love to teach that to, like, high school students and junior high kids.
Yeah.
Like just get in there and just be like, okay, we have identities, and they can be so complex and mixed, and we can express them in different ways, and that is okay.
Yeah.
That is perfectly fine. We're not. It's and the. But I think one of the roots, and I can go down this rabbit hole. One of the roots of that kind of interaction, of this idea of you're not blank enough, you're not
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
enough,
Yeah. Yeah.
comes from a protection of an identity.
Yeah. Yeah.
It kind of creates a cognitive dissonance, which is like this idea that you're presented with something that's opposite to what you believe, and they just can't live in your brain together. And so it creates for some people, it causes a lot of anger and frustration. And that's usually what leads to the whole, pointing the finger and saying, you're not something enough because that's my identity. I own that identity. Like, it's that, like, that's mine. How can you be that way? Because it's causing a kind of difficulty in my brain.
Yeah, like I mean, I struggled with this. I won't speak for anybody else. I'll just speak from my own experiences. Like growing up, I mean, I had a super like crazy like childhood. I had this interesting story where like I legitimately didn't even find out I was part black until I was 15. Um, and then and you want to talk about like identity and shit? I'll full on admit it. Like, guess how old I was when I got these dreadlocks when I was 15. Like, I'm not dumb enough to
Right.
think that there's no correlation between that. You know what I'm saying? Me wanting to express that. But a lot of people are like ashamed of stuff like that, or like would try to come up with some other reason, or try to, and but also like there was like this, like, so I played football. I was a good football player. So like I felt like, like football players, especially in a state like Oklahoma, like they act this way, you know. But then I was also like, I grew up poor. Like I found myself in like quote unquote like street or hood scenarios too. And then it's like, like, oh, hood dudes act like this. You know what I'm saying? And then, but at the same time, like I grew up when I was 8 years old, my favorite band to listen to was like Blink 182. So like, how does that, blend in with that? And then there's just like this like Oklahoma, for lack of better terms, like white culture, which you have to learn to navigate, or else you just ain't gonna make it no place in a place like that. So I fucking was always just mixing and matching and what do they call that? Code switching and like my whole life was like a Key and Peele skit. And then for real, and then I realized like it took me a little bit older, like maybe 23, like I got out here in California. I didn't have any outside influences. Like I really was like getting to know like who I am without these like structures and cultures and friends and all this that have been like imposed on me. And then I realized that like it kind of like what you're saying, that like I'm all of that. Like it's not these squares that don't fit. It's like this big Venn diagram, and I'm right there in the middle at the intersection, like you said, of all these things. And it took me until I was older and out in the adult world and even out of college, before I could really, really come to grips with that and love that and embrace that and lean into that. And like you said, all these junior high and high school kids that are just like either trying to fit a label on themselves or having one thrust upon them, or you're not black enough, or this isn't how football players act, or this isn't how black people act, or just we're fed all this shit until there needs to be like the answers can only come from within. I feel like with all these outside influences, you got to learn. Sounds corny, but you got to like learn to love all that is you. You know what I mean? Like you can't like turn your back on a certain side of you or try to act like a certain side doesn't exist. Like they can all exist and coexist for that matter.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons. That's one of the things that I talk, because I have a lot of cousins that struggle with the whole you're not indigenous enough, or you're not white. It's that whole you're not white enough, you're not indigenous enough. So like, then where do I exist? And there are even some people out there who are mixed who just go, well, I look this way and therefore I have to stay within this box.
Yeah.
And every single person I talk to about being mixed, I always go like, you are and in both. You're going to have a lot of people come at you because they're trying to form their identities. And I think that's part of it is like they're trying to form their identities and when you're met with and so much of how we form our identities is based off of what we see other people are.
Yeah.
And so again, like hey, it's almost like you are by being you teaching other people how to be you inadvertently.
Yeah.
And so when you have somebody who might identify with you, but at the same time isn't really picking up what's in their head of what their identity is, that's going to create that clash. And so whenever somebody has that issue or like talks about that, I just go, you are and in both. You are everything. You are far more than this world would make you think. Because there's a beautiful, and it does have to be sought out internally, because unfortunately, like, we don't teach classes in this, and like me being like a lecturer, like a professor, like I want to be like, can I like make up this class and this class and this class? I would totally write that class and everybody would come out feeling amazing about themselves.
Our society doesn't place a dollar value on that, right? Like that class isn't going to make that school any money. So it's right. Fucked. I feel you. There right. needs to be more that like it sounds. I say it with dogs all the time. Like Holly will, my dog's Holly, like will learn something from another dog. I'm like, or teach a younger dog something, like, oh, are you teaching you how to dog? Like we'll kind of crack the joke, like how to be a dog. Like you're learning how to be a dog, but like we need classes on like how to be a human, like how to, like for real, just the basic. Like we skip steps like 1 through 5 and somehow focus on algebra. Like how about we like learn how to like live in our own skin? Like I don't know.
I personally think that the like K through 12 education does not really take into account the actual development of the human being. So like, for instance, like I said, in junior high and high school, it'd be great to teach class on identity, right? Because that's when they're forming it. That's when they're forming their identity. Yeah. And everybody's like thinking, oh, it has to be this like process of just like making mistakes and being bullied and being hurt and you know you know little people playing out their parents' prejudices.
Seriously,
Like
yeah.
that just like why does that have to happen when like there's always a better way, but you know that then they're get but the problem is like it's those parent prejudices that has that control. It's like that, like us in research and education, we're just like, we have this idea, and then you still have to, you're still at the mercy of like everyone else who maybe isn't educated in that kind of thing, so it becomes that clash.
When you just think
So
about and I don't know, hell, like to a lot of people, like I said, I didn't really discover myself or learn to love myself, or and I'm still in, right? It's a constant journey. But like I said, I was about 23, 24. Like, what about all the people that like don't even make it that far? You know what I'm saying? Like it's kind of a privilege to be 24 and like still making decisions for yourself. Like especially where I come from, I mean, it's over with by 24 for a lot of people. Like for one reason or another. Maybe you fucked up your life. You got a bunch of felonies when you were young. Maybe, you had a bunch of kids from some woman that you got nothing in common with. You already fucked up your athletic career by then, or just whatever the case may be. Like I yeah, it's kind of like I don't know, like there's this line in this rap song I really like where it's like you make it to see 25 nigga use a OG, and it's kind of like meant to be like a gangster or a hood line, but like I take it and like extrapolate more from it, like for real, like to be able to reach that age coming from a certain place, like it's like a privilege that not everybody even gets to make it this far, and it really just breaks my fucking heart. Like I got friends, I mean guys I grew up with, and like I said, I'm just now getting to this age where like, oh, I can kind of have agency on my own life, and I can have my own podcast and dress how I want to dress and spend my time, dedicate my, however many hours I get in a day to furthering my own cause and have agency. And like it just before so many people get stopped before they even make it that far. And that's the part that, like you said, if we reach these kids and taught them these skills before, at 13 to 17, I think it could, help improve that a lot.
there's a lot of people that they've got to reach the ages of 40 before they before they
Yeah.
start to even form their identity, and that's because you have a lot, again, so many different ways to take off from that. Um, and I actually have, so I would love to read up more about this. Again, it's like as a researcher, I could go off in so many different areas of research, but one of the things that I've often pondered about and wanted to know more about is kind of the nature of oppression and like what exactly oppression is. So many people live the acts of oppression, but at the very root of it, what is it doing to us psychologically? And I believe like oppression is far more than a history of slavery, or I mean it and racism. It's kind of this the root of oppression is denying somebody who they are.
Yeah.
That to me is the very root of it. Is like when you are denied even the ability or the space to develop yourself, to be who you are, to find that, then you're stuck in oppression. Like if you've reached a certain age and you still haven't figured out, you still haven't had the space or the comfort to be who you are, that's oppression right there. that
Yeah.
that to me is oppression. Like, and if you think about it, like all the way back, it's like, oppression is a denial of culture. It's like like taking away your culture, taking away your ability to express who you are, taking away your ability to practice what you practice.
I just
um
thought of like the perfect like intersectionality to bring these two conversations together at like the perfect point. So you mentioned earlier how if you're mixed, you're both, right? And then you just talked about if you're having like if you don't have access to like who you truly are, you're oppressed, right? To me, especially me being mixed part black, there's like a single moment you can point to that like fucks all that whole thing up. Because I agree conceptually with every word you just said, but it's like the definition of in practice versus in theory. In practice, you know what fucked that up for black folks, and I can't speak for all races, but the one drop rule. I'm sure you're aware of the one drop rule. So it removed black people or mixed people's ability to be both. And that is, as somebody who grew up in the South, and I mean, I've lived in towns that are still segregated with populations of less than 2,000 people. I've been in the shit. I know that's why I can't stand whenever like woke Bay Area people try to tell me about racism. Like I've lived in like segregated Southern places, like, and I'm only 26 years old. Like, don't try to tell me about it. But anyway, what I'm getting at is yeah, just this one drop rule, and it's like been embraced by both sides. Like I had black folks telling me before I even took my DNA test and found out I was black, they could look at me and tell. They're like, you know, you gotta essentially pick a side. Like you with us, like them white folks ain't gonna love you regardless. Like you gotta choose up. And so it's like, I don't know, that I want, like the one drop rule kind of throws like a wrench in that ability for a lot of, you know, mixed mulatto people to kind of be both or embrace both. Like there was an actual like not physical, but a real law, like actual like paperwork, judges, courts, you know, enforcing it. And so I think, and you know, of course, you know, you hear people all day, oh, why are you always focused on that shit that happened so long ago? Because like these are the ramifications that still exist today.
They echo through generations. In you know, Native American you know, communities, it's it's blood quantum, right? So like, and
Hey,
it's,
you guys
and
have an actual number put on your shit. That's even
yes,
more crazy, for real.
yeah. So like I you know, I have to have my paperwork,
That's
right?
wild.
I have my paperwork that tells me exactly, you know, according to my tribe, this is how much of my blood like allows me to be part of my tribe and enrolled in my tribe.
Wow.
I actually have a friend who's Lakota, and she has a baby, and she's mixed, but her baby cannot be considered, her child cannot be considered Lakota, even though they're on the res.
Wow.
She studies like all, she has studies all of like this, like the spiritual practices. She's up, you know, she's traditional practicing, and she teaches that to her child. Her child actually knows the Lakota language and is learning the Lakota language, and yet can't be
Wow.
considered Lakota
What do you
because of blood
know?
quantum.
I got two follow-up questions based on that. I mean, and feel free to not answer either one, to be honest. They're kind of personal. What's your percentage, just out of curiosity? And then what is like that cutoff percentage for your friend that's Lakota? I'm super curious about both of those.
So actually, because of I'm not entirely certain what the blood quantum cutoff is for all tribes, because I mean we are all sovereign
Yeah,
nations.
yeah,
That
yeah,
is
yeah.
like that's a huge aspect of it. You know, there's all these different governing bodies. So you know, and blood quantum was something that was brought about from the U.S. government and the you know, Bureau of Indian Affairs.
Yeah.
But for me, I'm a quarter. I'm considered a quarter.
Okay.
I have lineage, I believe, that connects to the great nation in Hawaii.
Wow.
I have, you know, Polynesian. You know, if we were to do a DNA test, I've got Polynesian blood as well. Um, but according to the tribe, I am a quarter, and that means that if I were to have a child with anybody from any other tribe, they wouldn't be registered
So
as
that's the
fecund.
cutoff, like an eighth, right? An eighth is a cutoff.
Eighth is like
Oh,
you're
wow.
not that tribe. So like I am like the last generation in my
Unless you got with like a full blood from the same
right,
tribe, even if it
which
was a different tribe.
yeah, well, see, that's kind of the funny thing is like because so um I've got a lot of relatives in the Lummi tribe. Like they're all like cousins.
So
I've
yeah,
got
it would
so
be
much
kind of
family,
impossible.
so much family.
Wow.
And I haven't even met all of them. Apparently, there's an entire hill in on the reservation that I'm
Oh,
related
wow.
to. So
Wow.
like so there's like lineages and actually keeping so that's a one of the things in tribes, like it's important to have somebody who keeps track of genealogy, because you know there's like, you want to know who your cousin is, like that's
Totally.
kind of an important thing.
Yeah.
um so it's one of those things where and I mean my friend makes this point all the time. She goes, it's like, I might look the way I do, but I am Lakota, and and if you want, and sometimes like some full blooded Lakota are, you know you've got to like get with your cousin or something, because like
That's
we're all
wild.
we're all connected, we're all related.
Yeah.
um
That's crazy.
but
Yeah, and just even the way
yeah.
like how just genes and how that all works. Like so like my great grandfather is full blown black, like dark skinned black. Like and it's the wild thing is I have a picture with him and like we actually look super similar, like the exact same head shape, like literally just like a video game. If you just lighten the skin on him, you pretty much have me. But so it's wild just how like the genealogy can pass along and all that and like exactly and like I mean I thought about that myself, you know what I mean, like I'm married and my wife doesn't have any African American in her, and so like my child, there's a good chance my child don't come out looking black at all, and I've already, child ain't news not even pregnant, child isn't even really, it obviously isn't even exist yet, and I've already begun to think about this like issue of identity and what the hell does he claim or she or who, the future child, what. So it's as murky and as mixed as I am, it's gonna be pretty much double, you know what I mean, for my future for seed, and it's just how important identity and race, all that is. I've already thought about that for a person that doesn't even exist yet. It's wild.
So my only kind of thing with that is because I've worked with so many young people, because I'm a professor, so I get them after they've gone through the horrors of high school. We're not even going to go into the horrors of high school, but like I get them after that. And so one of the and it's almost like they need that permission to be themselves. And a lot of the kind of teaching that I do, especially as so I teach like clothing design and like the sociology connections with clothing, and so much of that is like, who are you? I just spend the
Yeah,
whole time standing up there, like, be like, who are you? Let's work this out and let's express that. Let's figure out how to express that. And that's kind of like that's the fun aspects of my job.
yeah, that is cool.
Um, but whenever like I think about that too, like who will I end up with? Who will I have a child with? And what will I do? What will I be able to do for that child? And I think a part of it is like telling those stories. Like stories are one of the biggest, educators, forms of education, because they have this really great aspect of like helping the person who's listening to the story make their own kind of conclusions about it, and kind of for them internally realize the next steps. And I think just telling stories about what it is to be mixed, what it is to be and in both. It's like having both parents talk about kind of the struggles that they've had, being like just being in existence. One of the kind of tragedies, I guess, of my life is I didn't get a chance to get to know my father, who was mixed.
Hmm.
Right. So he still had this, he had the same, you're not indigenous enough, or you're not white enough kind of situations.
I bet it was
And I
even
had a
worse
ton of,
back then.
yeah, and I have a ton of family who's going through that. I have cousins that like I would have loved to know growing up, because because having them talk about those experiences as we grew up would have been a huge benefit, to kind of understanding how to form who I am, and how to, and what I mean by how to form who I am is like they don't have control over it, but we always have this like this agency where we have this like kind of like teeter totter, or like these two aspects of like agency and knowledge. So
Yeah.
we're like gathering this idea of what it is to be our identity from other people, but then we also have that agency to mold it for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I never underestimate the power of that agency in another human being. And like really all you can do is tell stories, and then if they are given the time to actually work through it, because if they're good, because that idea of like working through it, and that introspection, that needs to come from an acceptance of whoever they'll end up being.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it, right? Is it's like these people can't be themselves for like fear of consequence. And it's crazy. I know this story gets told all the time as like in the context of like the gay community, right? Like them being able to live their true selves. But I feel like even for people that aren't gay, just like dressing how you want to dress, listen to the music you like. There's a lot of smaller like little things, and you're right that these teenagers, these kids, just feel like they can't be themselves. And I was like, I had both. Like my mom was full blown, like, you know what I'm saying? Change your name to Sally and go do art in San Francisco. I'll love you. You know, my mom was full, like, regardless of how I turned out, my mom was on board with it and supportive. But my dad was the classic, like, oh no, this is what you like this is manly, this is cool, like this is what you like, you know, and yeah, just like if I never would have had my mom who like would have accepted my choices regardless, like I couldn't imagine having two parents that were both on that like unaccepting type tip. And I've met these kids where like I was raised like my mom's cool as hell. Like my mom, like I could like, cuss and shit. Like I wasn't raised like super traditional, but like I've met these kids, you know, where they're 17 and like they're 18, maybe they're even still in college or whatever. They're grown essentially, and like oh, I can't do this, and it won't even be like, oh, I can't do heroin on the street corner. Like no, it's like something basic like that we all like, you know, maybe even just as simple as a tattoo or a hairstyle or wearing a certain type of clothing or whatever the case may be. Studying, there's grown kids in college like they don't even get to pick their own major. Like, oh nope, my dad said I have to be an engineer. Like, you know what I mean? And it break like I didn't even know because of how I was raised. I wasn't raised like that. So I didn't even think that was an option. I'm just like, oh, tell your dad to fuck off and go major whatever you want. But these, you know, like 18 years of brainwashing and control and removing the ability to make one's own decisions, it like neuters people mentally.
I think one of the to kind of piggyback off of that, and even going back to a previous point, I think there's this like scale, like there's this scale, and on one side you have survival, which is kind of born from a lot of fear, and it many times leads to a lot of anger and hate. On the other side, you've got this idea of living, right? It's not just life, it's living. And like that's where you actually have the space and the kind of mental ability to really form who you are. And where you kind of end up on that spectrum, really, I mean, there have been studies that link this idea of like fear and hate and survival to like conservatism. And this idea of like when you're given that like freedom, that space to explore, you know, who you are, like that's actually like it's a political scale. It can be a political scale too.
Hmm.
Um, but oftentimes too, this idea of like survival and desire to live also can be on that political scale. Again, it's like on the one side you have that survival, and oftentimes that's where you get the oppressed, right? That's where that oppression takes place. You take away that oppression and you're given all of this space to kind of figure out who you are. And that happens on like a family level, and that can happen on a great deal on a societal level,
Yeah, yeah,
where again that oppression, it gives you that box to fit
yeah.
in, and
Hmm.
and it denies you yourself. So really that's like I personally think that, like, just bringing it back to clothing, I personally think that the limitations out there for us available to purchase and wear, that's a form of oppression because it's like if I can't wear whatever I want to wear,
Well, would you
and there's
agree though that like there's probably never been a better time for that with the rise of online shopping? Because like even if you lived like in a small podunk town or on a reservation or whatever, I mean, granted, obviously there's the price of like the money issue, but that aside, like you can get pretty much whatever you want nowadays. Like I grew up like in a small town, Wynnewood, Oklahoma, and you had to drive an hour to the nearest mall, and it was still a small, shitty mall. And you bet your ass after driving all that way you're leaving with whatever they got at this mall, like regardless of whether you like it or not. You know how it was back in the day.
right.
But nowadays, so I just feel like, well, granted, I agree what you said is true, and there isn't something for necessarily everybody, but wouldn't you kind of say it's kind of never been better as far as options or like, being able to express yourself?
Well, I mean, in every single culture, there was a time when you made your own.
Mm,
And if I were going to pinpoint a time when it was really good for self-expression, um, I mean, you are right. Like there is a limitation to that because like there still are because I mean, being somebody who's taken fashion history, there were very distinct, styles and ways you dressed, given the century you were in.
hmm
But I think like there was far more variation. There was far more um, exploration. I think at the times when we didn't have this like industrialized aspect to clothing, and more to the point, it's was better for the environment at
Yeah,
that time when you made your own clothing
yeah,
because then it wasn't like an external process of like the industry deciding what ends up staying out there available versus what ends up being thrown away. And so I think part of decolonizing fashion is kind of taking out a little bit of that industrialized aspect,
mhm,
and especially the fast fashion aspects of fashion, to really open up. And because my belief is that if you open up the ability for everybody to explore their identity in more unique ways, you not only it's not only a societal benefit because everybody feels a little less like they have to like have a certain identity to survive. They can actually be themselves and get out of that oppression, but also that it's better for the environment. I mean, I mean, I don't know if everybody knows, it's just great for your viewers to know, is that the fashion industry actually is the second largest polluter of the
wow,
planet. So,
wow.
so yeah, it's second to the oil
Agriculture,
industry.
right?
So
Oh, oil.
yeah, so the thing is, we all know that like oil pipelines and driving your car, everybody talks about carbon footprint and how driving your car, it's contributing to the greenhouse gases, and that's what's causing climate change. But another thing that's causing the climate change is the polyester clothing that you wear, and how
Wow.
little plastic. So polyester is actually plastic, and plastic ends up in the oceans, which makes the oceans more acidic, which makes it difficult for the oceans to actually process and create oxygen.
Wow.
So there's a lot of issues around just the way that we consume clothing.
Wow.
And so like, and for me, I believe that we have all the science in the world to be able to address climate change. The problem is that culturally we don't actually want to act on those
Yeah.
solutions.
Yeah, we
And
want the
one of the ways
microwave
that
solution. But my bad, just to pause you real quick. We are coming up on the end of this first hour and Instagram will cut us off. So just
okay.
yeah, did you want to go ahead and wrap it up? Was there anything you wanted to maybe come back and talk about on and go a little longer? The ball's totally in your court.
Well, I mean, we could go on like this for hours, but I think we covered like
We
a
did.
great deal of stuff. I actually really enjoyed this,
Yeah, yeah, me too.
and really enjoyed like being able to talk and like exchange. And thank you for sharing all of your stories.
Oh yeah.
That was really important,
Yeah, no,
for
thank you
for
for
me
having.
because I deeply respect people who share who.
Did you? I think you froze up a little bit. You still there with me? Um, Oh man, it looks like, well, I guess this is a good time to wrap it up then. Looks like we had a little bit of technical difficulties here, a little freeze up. But yeah, you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up. That was episode 21 of Dreadful Talk featuring Janine Hillaire, Apparel Studies and Sociological Researcher. I thoroughly enjoyed my conversation with her, and I really appreciate her time. Um, and yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this episode. It'll soon be available on YouTube, on Spotify, on Anchor, about anywhere you would find a podcast. So thank you everybody for that tuned in live, and thanks for everybody that's going to check it out on one of those platforms. Subscribe to the Dreadful Talk Podcast YouTube page and follow me on Instagram at Dreadful Talk Dom to catch these live. Thanks everybody. Thank you.